Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's long-range technical forecast video brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. This analysis is being provided for perspective only, and any decision made based upon this presentation is the sole responsibility of the person making the decision. Finally, please remember that all long-range weather forecasting is speculative by nature. Let's get it caught up on a couple of things. We're going to look first here across North America, focusing in on the last 30 days of precipitation. And what I'm mostly concerned about when we look at this is to try to understand where we're seeing drought develop. And so as you kind of notice, there's places down in the southern plains to the lower Mississippi River Valley, and also in California over to the Four Corner states that have been quite dry over the last month. Now, if we look at this from a little different perspective, this is now just from the AHPS data looking at the last 30 days. Notice that California, Nevada, and parts of the Four Corner states are sitting between 0 and 30% of normal on precip. There's been a region right in through here that's been quite dry as well over the last 30 days. We've seen drought degradation coming out of Texas and moving toward the lower Mississippi River Valley, but recent heavy rainfall in this area as that storm system formed this week that now targeted the Ohio River Valley really brought up those precipitation amounts as of late right there along the Gulf Coast. So from there, why don't we just look at the latest drought monitor? We've got a brand new one of these coming out on Thursday. And expansive drought across the western part of the United States. And there's going to be a lot of eyes on this map throughout winter because without the development of a strong subtropical component to the jet stream that cuts into this area, or the polar jet diving down into the mountains, we're going to have a tough time eating away at the drought that you see here on this map. So let's just keep a close eye on this as we progress forward. Most recently, over the last couple of days here, actually over the last 3 days, we're looking at snowfall accumulations. And overall, the heavy snows predicted by all of the models here right along the southern edge of Lake Erie were really well done. And even the heavier snows getting up into parts of the Tennessee, North Carolina border and into West Virginia were also well captured by the models here. So that was a pretty potent little system that came through there. So why don't we just take this and look at now through December 2nd where we sit in terms of accumulated snowfall departure. So this would be comparing to average. I calculated the average from 2008 to 2019. So a few things to point out here. Parts of the Central Rockies, in parts of Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming, we're still sitting in deficit. And you can see that over in the Sierra Nevada and also in the Klamath Mountains in northern California, we have deficit compared to normal. And then it's interesting, there's a pocket right in here in North Dakota that's been very dry, missed out on a lot of the recent precipitation, whereas around it in Montana and then to the south of it here, bigger snows earlier in the month of November. Without a dominant high-pressure cell sitting over parts of Ontario and Quebec, we've not gotten the really cold air to race across the lakes, bringing in big lake effect snow, so you can see the deficit there. But that system that pulled through Ohio over the last couple of days, now we see where the heavier snows have come out of that, and you can see the surplus in that area. So I like looking at these maps. They just give us some interesting perspective on things. But where we currently have snow sitting on the ground, well, this is what it looks like. And so we have a lot of the central plains going back to the high plains up in Montana that are snow-free at this point. And it's just been the recent addition here that's really brought snowfall totals up across the United States. So I just want to keep you up to date on that. Speaking of snow, we are watching a system right now coming out of parts of Oklahoma, Texas, and Kansas, where we do have winter storm warnings and weather advisories. European model here has, I think, got a pretty good handle on the total snowfall amounts, and don't be surprised if inside here, due to the way the air flows around the backside of this low, that we could get some very persistent banding, bringing in some locations here better than 8 inches of snowfall right into this corridor. Also on the front edge of this, we could see in the Ozarks here possibly picking up a few inches of snow as well, maybe 1 to 2. Let's watch it on the high-resolution NAM model. I'll just pause it right here as we saw early this morning the formation of this low. So what you notice is that the moisture flowing around the backside right into there. So if you get a chance to watch this before this is over, I do want you to see what the models were picking up on. Now that low kind of fades a bit as it goes over toward the lower Mississippi River Valley. You can see here on Thursday afternoon what the rainfall is going to look like. But it will reinvigorate as it gets over toward the Carolinas. And this is what we're going to be quite interested in watching, because toward the end of the week and weekend, possibly some very heavy rainfall from North Carolina to Virginia and then up the Northeast. Let me show it to you by looking at the latest data here from the European model. You see there's quite a bit of liquid in this. Notice from Pennsylvania through New York up to Maine, the possibility of getting in here between 1 and over 3 inches of liquid equivalent. Some of this will be snow, but possibly some heavy rains does sit there. But a point to make here, and we're going to talk about this in a moment, is you go from Indiana back clear to like Saskatchewan and Alberta. Very dry through here. And after this low comes out today, it's going to be dry in the plains as well and dry back in the southwest. And even though you see quite a bit of precip here in Washington, this is actually below normal for this time of year. So we need to talk about that pattern. But first, something to discuss tomorrow and on my update. The low is currently forecast to sit right over this part of like Massachusetts and Connecticut here. And this will be Saturday afternoon. And finding that boundary on where that snow is going to be very tricky for our northeast forecast. But the potential for some very heavy snows on the backside of this. Okay, this is where we start to pull this out now and get into the longer range. The jet stream is very zonal and very fast across the Pacific, and it's splitting into large ridges that build up into Canada and a piece that cuts farther to the south. Now, with this particular pattern setting up this weekend, I don't like seeing this when I think about what this could mean for California, specifically some strong downslope winds going into the valley and rushing out to open ocean at the surface. Now, these are jet stream level winds. I don't like that. This is very stagnant flow in through here. Where does everything come together? Into the east. You can see the subtropical component. I'll circle it right down here. And one of the things that this particular flow pattern is missing, which is characteristic of La Nina, is seeing that subtropical jet stream coming from here all the way in through this area. So we're missing that stronger flow in this part of the atmosphere. And that's something I think we might be dealing with a lot this winter should La Nina continue to develop the way it's currently developing. So let's see everything play out here by going straight to the upper levels of the atmosphere and watching our troughs and ridges. Well, let's play this forward and pause it right here. I've got you out to Saturday night. Here's the low that's going to be cutting into the northeast, producing the snow on the backside and the heavy rain out ahead of it. But what I want you to see is kind of this almost reflective type pattern in the flow of the atmosphere this weekend, with a deep trough here, just off the shore here in the Atlantic from Europe, and this big ridge that's sitting right over this part of Russia. You see that there's a complementary side to this here, with another ridge building into Canada, and this trough that's cutting over into parts of the Aleutian Islands. Now, does this happen often? It can, but it's a pretty rare look at the way things are setting up here. Because as we go then into next week, those features kind of stick around. The ridge continues to stay here all the way out to the 8th. And look, this trough ridge pattern across Europe into Russia is still there. But some changes are taking place once we get out past probably the 9th or the 10th. And that very positive P&A pattern is going to start to break down, I think, at some point once we get to mid-month. So here we are on the 10th. Let's now get out to the 11th, 12th, and 13th. Now we still see the same setup in Europe, but we've kind of flattened things out a little bit here and allowed for this broad troughing to start to take shape right here in the U.S. Now, seeing that, this could start to really change the precipitation pattern through the northern plains. And if we can get these troughs to sweep out of the southwest, should they do that by the time we get to maybe the 11th, 12th, 13th, this could set up the central U.S. for a very active mid-month here. But as we go forward, this is the way we see things shaping up. And this is really indicative of almost what we call a negative EPO pattern as we move forward. But there's more pieces to it than just that. So if I let this play all the way out to mid-month, we continue to see the deepest possible anchor of the coldest air sitting here. And the flow around it at this point's washed out, but it's something that we have to see what this means in terms of precipitation and temperatures. So here's what I'm looking for here. Going all the way out to the 15th, we still see that the models are favoring the very strong, almost zonal winds coming off of China through Japan out into the Pacific. But as they have been doing, the flow tends to split, right? And we lose this subtropical component of the jet stream, which we often find this time of year. It's displaced. It's almost over here, meeting up with the polar jet. I think a big reason for that is what's going on in the tropics. And I've also put an arrow next to this. What you're seeing here is the top part of the Walker circulation, which includes the trade winds at the surface and then the winds flowing back to the east aloft. And so this is one of the reasons why we have kind of robbed the momentum here of the subtropical jet. And it's displaced farther to the south. And that's a very classic La Nina setup here when we think about the tropical circulation. And this is what it ends up giving us. The west coast remains dry, and like I said, I'm going to be watching very carefully in California for the with this drier conditions here on some stronger winds that might increase fire threat. But you do notice it's quite dry across the west, but as that pattern evolved, look, you start to now see on this side of the Rockies wetter conditions into week 2. And I think what I'll be concerned about is to see if we can get some features turning coming through the Midwestern part of the United States as well. That's what the Europeans currently got for us. Let's talk temperatures now. Over the last 30 days, it's actually been quite warm. Cold air intrusions have been limited across much of the United States. And when you get over here in parts of the Central Plains, we're talking about a 5 to 8 degree warm bias over much of the last 30 days. This morning was very cold, another very cold one down here in the south, and we did have freeze warnings that got pretty far to the south here near Ocala, just a couple of counties north of Tampa as well. And this was all behind that big low that was pulling on off to the north and east. But looking over our next 5 days, with the jet stream pattern really highly amplified like this, the warmth in both models here pushes up into Canada, and we're broadly cooler than average across the south. Days 5 through 10, very similar pattern here set up both the GFS and the European model with again that ridge dominating not only the drier pattern but the warmer than average pattern through this area, with the coldest air still down here over the southeast. But where the models begin to diverge in their pattern goes out to the day 10 through 15. The GFS is a bit more aggressive on the return of the cold air, whereas the European, which you see over there on the right, is slower with the progression of that. While they both tend to give us this look, okay, in the flow of the atmosphere, the temperature anomalies here are quite different. And to be honest, at this point, I think there's a lot more validity in maybe the pattern and temperatures we have from the GFS, and that the European is a bit too warm in this area. But I need to see a few more model runs to see if that trends a bit cooler there in the central part of the United States. In other words, by mid-month, we could be returning back over toward what we'd call normal December temperatures in the central part of North America. Beyond that, let's now go out to days 14 through 21. So this would be week 3. I've got the GFS on the left and the European on the right. Look at the changes that are happening here, okay? And at that particular point, you see that the models are backing off on the really above average warmth in the midsection of the United States and also, of course, in Canada. And if we then go from there out into week 4, so this gets us actually just past Christmas, the models are once again advertising warmth, especially here over the eastern part of the United States. Now, remember, it's going to be late December, so to be a couple of degrees warmer than average is still cold, and there are still systems pulling through this flow. This is averaging an entire week together. Remember, that's what we're doing. But I'm curious as to why the models keep giving us this look. So to answer that, I'm going to look in 2 places, and we're going to start in the tropics. Our La Nina just continues, and the nose of these trade winds is pushing right over here to about 125 east. So if that's the location, remember, this is like, an MJO position, 4, 5, and 6, right in this area. So if the trade winds are nosing here, and there's a little bit of westward motion there coming off the Indian Ocean, I'll just circle it again. The air is going to start to rise right in through here. Now we see from the European model's extended forecast of the MJO that it is going to be hanging out weekly over here, weekly over here in phase 4, 5, and 6. And we see that showing up already at day 15. So there's where our upward motion is, and there's a bit more suppression in the vertical motion here. And interestingly enough, that has now moved back over part of South America, which has started to pull back on the week 2 precipitation totals there as well. But before we talk about that, I'm curious, what kind of pattern do we typically get if the MJO is over here in phase 4, 5, and 6? So that's what I'm showing you next. Generally, during that time period, we tend to have broad warmth across this area of the United States. When I say warmth, I'm just talking about a couple of degrees above average for both. This down here is phase 6 and up here is phase 5. So these are kind of like the correlations. So remember, the cold phases are over here. So if we keep sticking in this area, and that's what the European model is saying, that's why you see the warmer conditions over there on the 2 maps that are on the right. Now, from there, though, I want to tell you that is also a phase of the MJO that favors drier conditions here. So the week leading up to Christmas, so the 18th through the 25th, the European model just released yesterday is now painting this area over toward dry. So that's a drier trend. And I've been presenting to you that this is an area that we've seen actually 2 significant dry time periods at the beginning of November and then over the last 10 days that we've got to watch. Quite a bit of precip right now coming to southern Brazil and northern Argentina, Paraguay as well. But this is just something I'm going to keep an eye on to watch the model trends to see if it's disruptive to agriculture in South America. So please watch that with me. But coming back to the other component of this, it's going to be a discussion about the polar vortex. We've seen a couple of interesting things, some rising heights here over the Aleutian Islands and also over this part of Europe. And that's kind of put a bit of a squeeze here and some warmer conditions in these areas, which we watch for. Those are things that could disrupt the polar vortex. But over the next, 10 days or so, we do see the polar vortex attempting to kind of break into 2 separate pieces. But the model, at least the operational European, kind of draws everything back together here and keeps the warmest anomalies pushing into the top of the troposphere and into the stratosphere sitting in this area. Now, the big questions that we're going to have is this a disruption? Are we going to produce some strong stratospheric warming that could really displace and weaken the polar vortex? And that'll be something we watch for in the second half of the month of December. No solid evidence just yet on this, but it's something we all should be watching. Because right now, the polar vortex in its zonal wind strength is sitting right about here. And so, again, I keep coming back to this. Compared to average, we're right there. We're above it. And when we see a displacement or a weakening, then things drop down here, and then we got to watch out for somewhere to have a lot of cold air spilled into those areas. So that's just our current look at the polar vortex. Now, thinking about that, when we go back over the month of November, the Arctic Oscillation, which is a surface feature, not a stratospheric feature, but a surface feature that kind of tells us what's going on in the Arctic, well, it's been very positive throughout the month of November. And a lot of folks I've just noticed have recently been thinking about this and trying to analyze what's going on. So I'd like to just add a little bit of information to this. I want you to know that even at a monthly level, the Arctic Oscillation is quite noisy. It's a subseasonal fluctuation. In other words, unlike La Nina, where it can stay in a certain phase for months, the Arctic Oscillation is something that can change on a weekly timescale. And that's all that I'm trying to illustrate here. But some of the discussion has been around this. When you average the Arctic Oscillation over months, we see that there's been a few times in recent past where the AO has been very positive in November. And 2020, which isn't on here because the data are yet to come in, is probably going to be another one of those that comes up like this. So we start to pick off these years and we start to say, well, what happened in those years where the AO was very positive in November and in the following December, January, February? So I just pulled it together for you. What you end up getting, and I picked out these years, so this would be 78 to 79, 94 to 95, 13 to 14, and 15 to 16. We tended to get, a lot of cold air coming across here, and I'll tell you something, a lot of East Coast cyclogenesis. Now, the question is that going to be a good analog approach to forecasting the rest of the winter? And my answer to you right now is probably that it's not. And the reason why is because in those particular analog years, we didn't have the same setup, especially in the Pacific Ocean. You stitch all those years together and you tended to have warmer conditions here, not cooler like we currently have. So I just want to make a point here that as we finish this up, we need to be looking at a combination of events, not necessarily just one thing as we start to take shape for the rest of winter. I'll tell you this, though. I do expect it to be one where there's going to be a lot of volatility this winter. So let's keep an eye on it, and we'll keep you updated, all right? Thanks for your attention today. Have a great rest of your week.